there's the tweet.
So what it does? Oh, it does that automatically.
Yeah, it does. It does a tweet. Yeah, because I always get the notification when we.
Yeah, if I remember to write it. Yeah, and we're on Facebook now too.
Okay. All right. So I'll just start. Okay, this afternoon, we are thrilled to welcome Alex J. O'Connor to the Science Enthusiast podcast. Alex, known on the internet as Cosmic Skeptic, is an atheist, YouTuber, non-golfer, science enthusiast, yay, and ex-professional tea expert. I got all of this information from your Twitter bio, so I hope it's not fake news and totally accurate, and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. It's very ex-tea expert because I was able to finally rid myself of that Saturday job thanks to the tremendous support I've been receiving online. So it's one of the many benefits of these kind of things.
Oh, that is fantastic. And yes, congratulations on having over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. You are really you're killing it on YouTube.
Well over.
It's amazing.
Thank you very much. Often the question comes my way of how I managed to do it, and I always say, well, if I knew, then I'd probably do it again. It's still amusing, but you know, I'll take it.
No, you're doing some really great work, and I mean, we saw it come across the Friendly Atheist website and Pathos, and you're getting out there, which is fantastic. For how old are you? I asked you before, but I guess tell our listeners because you are our youngest.
18 years of age, so just about managed to see some of the last millennium, but just about.
Just about. All right, so I want to start with your kind of origin story, like how you got to this point where you are talking skepticism and science and atheism on this platform. Have you always been of this skeptical, non-believer mindset, or?
Well, I think I suffered from a complex which I think many people suffer from through the entirety of their lives, this idea that you can be a perfectly rational individual, but in one particular area, and it often happens to be religion, for some reason that faculty gets switched off. And I think I was the same. I was a little younger, but it was the same principle in that I was a skeptical person. I asked a lot of questions, and I was always bringing up difficulties and things that made my teachers uncomfortable. But when it came to religion, I kind of accepted it as one of those things, one of those inevitabilities. It has to be true because everybody around me was sort of propagating it. And I thought there was no way that it could convince all of these people. And so it's something I just assumed. And so it wasn't so much that I wasn't good at questioning these things, I just didn't think to. And it was the moment that I started actually realizing that this is just an idea, one among many, that I was finally able to start questioning. So yes, I was a Roman Catholic growing up.
And welcome to the club. I think that makes three of us now.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I say I was a Roman Catholic. I technically still am, because to leave is tricky, to say the least. I think I have to write some letter to the bishop or something.
So are we all still Catholic then?
According to the Catholic Church, which is one of the reasons why when they say things like we have, you know, over however many members they claim to have, I'm afraid that's not the case. You have that many people who've been baptized by their parents, who in turn were probably only baptized by theirs and may have left the church by now too. So you can never quite trust their numbers. Not that trust is
a lot of things.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
That's the topic of another podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, but I haven't thought of it. We are kind of still Catholic, Dan. So
yeah, they don't let you go. They've got that grip on you.
Grip on you. Yeah. So you came to a point then where you started realizing that religion was just another thing that you can question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, for me, I initially made what I might think of as like a wrong step, and I think a lot of people do this, which is they'll be of one religious inclination and they'll start having questions. So you might not quite buy into the whole transubstantiation or the risen Christ or whatever it may be, and so you throw religion out of the window. You say God does not exist. There was no creator. This is all nonsense. The wrong thing to do, because there's, like I say, it's one option among many, and you have to sort of at least give yourself some exposure to other ideas before you can really sort of throw everything out. And also I adopted the whole rebellious Protestant atheist type of thing, which is like, there is no God, you're wrong, and here's why, and I don't want any of this. But now I've become much more calm and thought of it more as a sense of, as most atheists do, that it's not an active claim. It's just a lack of belief. That's what it comes down to. So that was sort of the 3-stage process. You start as a Roman Catholic, then I became sort of a fervent atheist. I'm still an atheist because atheism is the sort of neutral position. But this time next year, I could be a Muslim or a Catholic. I have no idea. If somebody wishes to send me an email with some convincing proof or something, and it does convince me, then I have no problem accepting. But as of now, it hasn't happened, and I'm not placing any bets.
And I think that that's a misconception too, is that people seem to think we're so firm in our, I guess, lack of belief that nothing could ever convince us. But if the evidence presented, it's compelling.
Well, yes, and another question that I'll often get, or I've seen other people get, is, well, what evidence would convince you that God exists? The problem is that we don't quite know, but Matt Dillahunty was good on this. I can't remember when it was, but I saw it on an episode of The Atheist Experience, and he said, a caller rung up and thought he was being smart. He said, okay, so what would convince you? And Matt Dillahunty says, I have no idea. And the caller goes, ha, see, I've got you. You don't know. And Matt Dillahunty says, well, listen, wait, nearly hangs up on him and says, listen, I don't know, but God surely would know. And so if God wants me to believe in him or her or it, then he should have no problem doing so. So although I don't know what would convince me, God does. And so we're left with the dichotomy of either he doesn't want me to know or isn't there. And again, you just apply Occam's razor and see which is the more likely scenario.
That's a really good answer that he gave, because
he gives some fantastic
he's really good at this stuff. And
you think. Well, he deals with a lot of interesting questions that to many people are just so sort of amusing and confusing, that somebody could ask something like that we don't know how to respond to it. And so it can be a really simple question, but you're sort of like, well, actually, I don't know what would convince me. And then that's the end of the conversation. You don't really know what to say, but he has experience with these kind of questions, and so he always has the best answers for them. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, okay, so speaking of Matt Dillahunty and all the, I mean, really great work someone like he does in answering some of these tough questions, were there books or authors or other scientists, atheists, that inspired you when you were kind of discovering this?
Well, I mean, of course. So there's the obvious choice is the Four Horsemen. I think anybody who has, especially people who've come from a religious upbringing or past life, the first exposure they'll really get is likely to be the Four Horsemen. And I think, again, it would have been watching Richard Dawkins on YouTube, who, now a lot of the arguments that then got me very riled up and excited, I now actually disregard and say they're not particularly good arguments. But that's how the exposure came. So although they were the initial installers, they may not be now the main inspirations. Past that, it wasn't a case of any person inspiring me, but ideas and principles and scientific truths that just more and more seemed to suggest the non-existence of God, and also shrank God. This God of the gaps that's often presented was just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and now it's just a minute speck in the back of my mind.
And I think that's not a bad thing. And I know we're going to talk about David Silverman here in a second, but and he, of course, makes that point all the time, that it takes all those different types of voices to get through. And so if that's what gets you on board and gets you thinking about it, questioning it, and gets you to that point where you can say, well, I don't believe in any form of deity, God, anything like that, then if you, I guess, evolve, is that the right word that I want here? Evolve from that to thinking, well, I need more evidence. I need of something to exist or something like that. A more relaxed maybe point of view. I think we need all those different types of voices, because people are different, and you gotta reach people somehow.
Yes, and I'm not trying to convince anybody.
Right.
That you shouldn't think this way, or you shouldn't think this thing. All I really, the goal, apart from the obvious secularism and philosophical discussion, the goal is just to say, look, but have some reason for it. If you want to be a Christian, that's absolutely fine, but at least be able to back up your claims. Like if you find a professional religious apologist who isn't just some kind of charlatan, who really has thought about it, really has considered the options, and really does find Christianity more compelling, fine. I still think you're wrong, but that's fine. We can have discussions, and that's it. So obviously, I'm arguing from one side of the fence, but the main underlying factor is just to say, well, just make sure that you know why you believe what you believe. And so I get emails from people of all faiths saying that they appreciate the videos, not just for the sake of promoting an atheistic philosophy, but just for starting conversations, and you shouldn't just blindly believe anything.
Yeah. We're big fans of starting conversations like that with some of the things we talk about.
And so one of the videos that you had out recently is kind of essentially about owning the label of atheist, or the calling yourself an atheist, and encouraging people to embrace that. And I think in your video, you said at one point, it's about letting people know that we're as, as atheists. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired that video?
Absolutely. So I was lucky enough to come into the company of David Silverman, president of American Atheists, who was, I believe, was on your podcast, you were saying, not that long ago.
Last year,
He came to London and was doing a talk in Conway Hall about his book. He's still on that book tour. And fascinating talk, and I spoke to him very briefly afterwards, and he signed my book and drew a picture of Muhammad in it. Then,
of course.
After the talk, there were some people in the audience who recognized me from my videos, and so we were talking, and then we decided to go to the pub. And after we'd been there for a few minutes, David Silverman himself walked in, kind of surprising me, so I sort of dived over and tried to get a seat opposite him, just so I could ask him a few questions. And from his talk and from our conversation afterwards, I was convinced that I'd been thinking about it wrong, and that it really was the case that if you are an atheist, that calling yourself a humanist or a freethinker or something is not as effective as calling yourself an atheist. Now, the reason I didn't think this before was because I was in agreement with Sam Harris on this, which is that the word atheism, the concept atheism, shouldn't exist. It's a nonsense concept. People often make jokes, there's no word for not believing in anything else. So why is there a term for atheism? And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it's clear why that's the case. And this is something that I said in the video, not verbatim, but the sense that if you think about the concept of non-golfing, it is not a concept, and the word non-golfer makes no sense. But imagine that we lived in a world where if a presidential candidate didn't play golf, he or she was automatically dismissed by the electorate. Imagine that parents were kicking their children out of their home and making them homeless, just for the sake of them not playing golf. All of a sudden, if you imagine a society in which non-golfers are persecuted in this way, well, you can see what's just happened. I've just used the word non-golfer in a sentence, and it probably didn't even register. Because in this context, all of a sudden, we've created a need for this word, because the concept has been brought about by means of persecution, discrimination, whatever you want to call it. Same thing's happening with atheism. And so my goal is basically, if we can own the label, make it loud enough, and make people understand what it is, and that it exists, then people will start to use it. It's sort of, it's like roll the boulder all the way up the edge of the cliff so you can just push it off altogether. That's sort of the main thing that I took from the talk, although our conclusions are different. He just wanted people to start using the word atheism. It was me who then realized that actually this can probably be used in order to get rid of the label altogether.
And that it's not necessary. Yeah,
and if we move closer to that, it will make access to babies for us to eat just that much easier.
Right, yes.
There are myriad, don't eat babies. Oh,
there are myriad benefits, myriad benefits of calling yourself an atheist. I think one of the main ones will be political and educational secularism is more likely to be acceptable. Atheist presidents, like your current atheist president, will admit that they are atheist presidents.
I know, and not have to fake it for the religious right, because that's leading to all kinds of dumpster fiery disasters.
It's absolutely, it's demagoguery at its finest. I should probably say at its worst. You often hear the statistic that there are 0 atheists in Congress. Not true. There's just 0 open atheists. The fact of the matter is that, statistically speaking, it would be incredibly unlikely if there were really no atheists in Congress. So the more likely scenario is that there are people who are in Congress, but they don't want to come out as atheists because of fears of not being re-elected. What does that say about the state of a secular nation if this so revered First Amendment that people so often use to invoke freedom of speech and expressing their religion is the very same amendment which should secure the right for a congressman or woman to say that they're an atheist, and nobody should care.
Well, and you think of, I mean, I think it comes out frequently in polls and whatever, is that atheists are trusted so far less than so many other groups of people. And this is just for a lack of belief. And
yes, well, it's not just that. It's the lack of belief for many people comes with the caveat of a lack of morality, because a lot of people sort of think of Christianity and morality as synonymous. And so if you take away the Christianity, you take away the morality. Now, at least the Muslims, they have a God, they have some moral barometer. But atheists, they don't have any. They're just completely immoral. Hitler was an atheist, Stalin was an atheist, and you hear all this drivel. And it really is just boring. It's boring at this point. And so this is what I'm saying. If we can own the label atheism, if we can use the label, and people are more likely to recognize that it exists and do some research into it. And if somebody meets you on the street and says, you know, what are your religious beliefs? And you say you're a humanist, someone will be like, okay, fine, whatever, let's leave it there. If you call yourself an atheist, somebody might ask a question. Oh, God. And you say, well, no, that's not what atheism is. Here, let me explain. And then the next time that person bumps into an atheist, they're not going to have a problem. And the next time an atheist runs for Congress, they're not going to have a problem. And the only way that we're going to get there, in the sense that conclusion would remove the need for atheism as a label, because all of a sudden nobody cares. But the way that we get there is by using the label. So it seems counterintuitive, but I think it might just work.
But you're talking kind of like a chain reaction of one person has the conversation, the person that receives that conversation.
In fact, that's a fantastic analogy, because it's exactly like a chain reaction. Think of a nuclear chain reaction. You set it off and it gets going, and then eventually it just blows up and disappears altogether.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
So maybe that.
And we're not talking about North Korea. But yeah, I mean, just like you said, I think it's for a lot of people, they have that question of, well, what do you believe? And they just can't make that connection between it's okay that there's all this unknown. It's okay that, you know, when we die, you turn into worm food, and that's okay. And that doesn't take away, if anything, that adds value to your life, I think, because you're saying what's happening now, what's happening during your life is that much more important than, you know, what's going to happen for all of eternity after you die. And that was one of the things that I couldn't ever rationalize whenever I was, because my parents we were Roman Catholic, but we were like Creasters, so we only went on Christmas and Easter. And that's whenever I finally got around to First Communion when I was, I think, 12 or 13, started actually learning, like, people actually believe this stuff. It's not just, oh, this is a fun, like, fable to go off of. That's when I was like, oh shit, this is nuts. And you really think this wine turns into blood, and I'm now a cannibal of some kind, and that's okay, unless I'm sick, and then I don't have to drink from the same cup. But why would Jesus make me sick in the first place? But
at the same time, I do understand the reluctance, because I do understand that if somebody is told that the only source of morality that they'll find, the only source of happiness, etc., is through religion, then when that starts to go, it can be tricky for people. I completely understand it, and I've experienced it myself, and I think many people often do. And there are many atheists who wish it were true, and there are also many atheists who wish it were, it wasn't.
I wish. I wish it were true. I wish. It's very comforting to think that there's somebody that's got your back.
I'm in two minds. I think for me, it would depend on the God as to whether I wish it would be true or not. But I'm in two minds about that. But besides the point, I understand both sides. But the fact of the matter is that the problem comes about because people are being told that morality comes from God and not the other way around. There's a fantastic quote. You reminded me of a quote from Ricky Gervais, who often just surprises me with some incredibly
in between posting selfies of him taking a bath and all this other weird stuff.
Just comes up with something brilliant. And one of the quotes I heard him say, at least I think it was him, was that people often say that atheists have nothing to live for, but actually it's the exact opposite. They have nothing to die for. They have everything to live for.
Yeah.
That's the crux of it.
Well, yeah, and that's something I think that we like to circle around to a lot, is that there's so much meaning in what we have now because we only have one chance. Like this is it. And
one
so,
shot or one opportunity.
But that's it. And so we
I don't know. I don't know if he.
You just made an Eminem reference. You made an Eminem reference.
I did.
I think you may have done.
Did that go over?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Because we're old. We are
no,
old.
I picked it up. I picked it up, but I couldn't quite tell. It was quite broad. But yeah, no, I'm a fan. I'm a fan. It didn't go over my head.
Good.
Yeah. So we're
devil
here.
Music.
Devil music, and
yes.
Eminem is devil music. It is. Yeah. So morality.
I do understand the this idea, like we say, yeah, oh, this is great, you know, it means we've only got one shot, but at the same time that can mean, oh, this is terrible, we've only got one shot. It is scary. It is. The thing that we have to accept sooner or later is that it's not always the case that the truth is going to comfort you. Okay, it's simply not the case. And then you have to decide if you value truth more than you value comfort. And I completely understand why people value comfort more than truth. But there's that old philosophical question: would you rather be a pig content or a human discontent? Now, if you ask me, I'd much rather be a human discontent. Because knowledge to me is something which is more important. Understanding the universe appeals to me more than comfort. But I do sympathize with the view that you do get some kind of comfort from religion. But my point then would be, if you need a God to get comfort from, just don't make it this God. Don't make it that God. Don't make it a God that judges people. Don't make it a God who once told.
Don't make it a God that invented AIDS, that invented Ebola, that invented cancer.
Yeah, perhaps you could think of it as like some kind of not quite omnipotent God who cares and loves, but isn't all powerful. Again,
he's busy. He's a busy guy. There's a lot of people.
But then you wouldn't need to worship him. You wouldn't need to sort of get down on your knees. But you could think, well, there's something out there, and there's something there for the afterlife, and that might comfort you. Okay, so if you really need something, sure, have your God, but just don't have that God. That's my only advice that I would always give. Well,
and then by that token too, you can have your personal beliefs and have your God, but what I think we're seeing over here, and I'm not entirely sure how much how much it goes into public life where you live, but I feel like religion enters politics and science and everything here. So it goes beyond just a personal belief that offers people comfort on an individual level and really infiltrates society. And that's where I think, you know, that's
the problem with the good news. It's too good to keep to oneself, and they have to promulgate it, and they have to give it out to everybody who will take it, or oftentimes people who won't. But this is the problem with monotheism. It must be that way, because you cannot believe that there can be no God but God, and have that guy over there worshipping a different God. If your God has told you, listen, I'm the only God, and without me, you're going to hell, and then you see your best friend worshipping a different God, you with fully good intentions, I admit, but you would still be going over to that person. You'd be saying to them, listen, you need to bow down and worship this God because I'm worried about you going to hell. And this is the problem that ensues with politics. It's slightly different, because you can understand, look, I believe this, they believe that, and yeah, they infiltrate each other, but they're bound to, and they don't always have to, and you can make arguments to say, look, you believe this, but you can keep it to yourself. But with religion, you can't do it, because if you believe this, you can't keep it to yourself, and that's exactly the problem. So when people say to me, look, why do you need to sort of go and crush these people's hopes and dreams by removing their God from the picture? And I say, well, look, it's not just because they so often infiltrate politics and education, like you say, but it's that they have to. And so it's not something that can necessarily be remedied. It's something that's just going to have to be thrown out altogether. And if you ask me, again, to answer that same question, the fact that if I succeeded in my mission, my philosophical mission anyway, to convince people that atheism is the best neutral standing point, I may remove some contentment and happiness from my nan's life, right? That doesn't fill me with joy. But the question is, you have to make a sacrifice. Do you value more the sort of contentment of people, or do you value the liberation of people who are being genuinely marginalized by religious majority across the world? Okay, because wherever you go, there is a religious majority, and it's a different religion, but they all basically are the same thing, which is some kind of reflection of archaic male, just abysmal characteristics that they throw out and put onto a god, and they stick around today. So although there are different gods, they're all sort of one and the same. But it's something that, like I say, you can't just change someone's view of God, because that's not how it works. You have to say maybe your God doesn't exist. Then once they've got that doubt in their head, they might start trying out different ideas of God. But until you've convinced them that the God that they're convinced of right now might not exist, you're not going to get anywhere. And so that's why you have to do it.
Yeah. And then, you know, we come to this idea of, you know, not just personal religion, but America being a Christian nation, which you addressed in another one of your videos. So you visited over here.
Well, of course, the current administration said so in a tweet, so that makes it true.
Yes, I can't remember exact wording. It was we said something like we worship. We don't
worship government. We worship
God in caps lock, because Donald Trump likes to keep the caps lock on.
I do appreciate how he's going cross-platform with that, though, because he linked to an Instagram video, so I can empathize with that. I need to get more Instagram followers, so
right.
But yeah, I'm really, like, I'm sorry that this is our president. I feel like I need to apologize to the entire world.
I just try to distract myself with small details about what he's doing and not focus on the actual awfulness.
The pool of choices wasn't particularly compelling, so I don't hold it against you. Although, and if there's any consolation, I don't necessarily think that it's the worst president you've ever had. It certainly ranks, but you know, you've had I think James Buchanan probably tops the bill, but he's not the worst. So I mean, I think you might just get through it. But there is a problem when any religious leader of America starts projecting that religion onto their people. There's nothing wrong, again, with being a Christian president. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being a Christian president, but there's everything wrong with being a Christian president, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You can't be. Yes. What I'm saying, the emphasis is important. He may have actually been right in the sense that the majority of Americans are Christian. Fine, yeah, sure, no problem. That doesn't make America a Christian country. This is the point that I often find myself making over and over again. Yes, your presidents are usually Christian, or at least pretend to be. Yes, the majority of your population is Christian, but America is not a Christian country. Now, people say, but look at the way that things are changing. Look at the way that more and more religious people are sort of taking over government. And I say, okay, fine. Maybe one day it will be. If there's some kind of amendments made to the Constitution, fine. Absolutely, but as of now, you are constitutionally secular, and you have to live by it. This is a common illusion that people have. In God we trust is your national motto. You have it on your money. It's very easy to see why people think that.
Well, only since the 50s, though.
It's been on the penny. It's been on the penny for longer than that. But yeah, it's a new thing. But also, pennies and dollar bills don't hold any legislative authority. They don't. I mean, they have a lot of legislative influence. That's another matter, but they don't have any kind of power over government. Okay, it's like you say. The motto was largely, although it was on the coin beforehand, it was only adopted as the motto for America during the Cold War. As many people know, this is sort of a.
And wasn't that also a Pledge of Allegiance too? Was the one nation under God?
Yes, Dwight D. Eisenhower. Yeah. Yes, he brought them in, and it was purely an attempt at sort of. Infusing the American people. But again, it says nothing about the Constitution which the founders created. The founders who actually wrote the Constitution, which still governs your country today, had a different motto. It was unofficial, but the motto was E pluribus unum, out of many one. And this is an entirely secular idea. And in fact, everything that represents the sort of liberation of 13 colonies from this sort of theocratic, oppressive state, sort of the antithesis of putting a theocratic autocrat, his name on your money.
Yeah,
I think that you know, if the founders, especially someone like Adams, if they saw that, or Madison, they'd be rolling in their grave. George Washington might not have cared, because this is another thing. A lot of people don't realize that the founders were largely religious. This is another argument that people have. People are always sort of shouting at each other, saying who's religious, who's not. Doesn't matter, because again, America is not Christian, and that's what matters. George Washington was probably Christian. Didn't talk about it much, but probably was. John Adams, loved Christianity. Thomas Jefferson called himself a Christian, but wasn't a Christian as we'd recognize one today. Okay, but they all recognize the importance of church-state separation. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, his tombstone, engraved on his tombstone are 3 things. Now, I'll have to try and remember them. One of them is that he founded the University of Virginia. One of them is something or else other, but one of them is also that he was the author of the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. And what surprises a lot of people when they sit and think about it is that absent from his tombstone is 3rd President of the United States. What we have is a situation where Thomas Jefferson wanted on his tombstone it to be written that he enshrined religious freedom and secular government more than he wanted people to remember that he was the 3rd president. So that sort of implies that the separation of church and state to someone like Thomas Jefferson was more important than his presidency. And if that doesn't say something about America's secular founding, I don't know what does.
And thank you. I just learned something. So
yeah, it's bugging me what the 3rd thing is that's on his tombstone. I can't for the life of me remember.
But what you said though really speaks volumes of what the country was founded on to where it is now, where we have a social media obsessed president who wants to signal to his, conservative Christian base that we pray, we're Christian, whatever. And I mean, he's faking it clearly, but the message is out there, and that's the dangerous thing, is that
one of the reasons why
we're having conversation.
One of the reasons the founders' views on religion is so compelling to consider today is for this very reason, because like I say, many people argued or tried to argue that the founders were largely atheists. They weren't. That's just a fact we have to accept. But this is actually this can work in our favor. For instance, take someone like John Adams, who once called Christianity the religion of wisdom, virtue, equity, and humanity. He had admiration for it. And yet, that's the same man who authored the Treaty of Tripoli, which said that the government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, another very famous quote. But what you have here is you have an example of a man who loved Christianity, but at the same time recognized that it shouldn't infiltrate government. Now, if the founders were atheist, it would be a lot easier to say, well, yeah, they were just atheists. They didn't care about religion and government. Now we have religious people in power, so we need to bring God into the Constitution. But what we can say is, no, the founders that you so revere, the same one that gave you your guns, are the same, were religious. They did have admiration for God, and yet they still recognize the virtue of a secular state. And so therefore you can do the same, because you're also religious. You can also take after the founders and do the same thing. It's just a misconception that people have that annoys me. People think that, especially Thomas Jefferson is often accused of being an atheist. He once said, an atheist is something I can never be. He had admiration for the Christian faith. He once called Christianity the most perverted system that ever shone on man in a letter to Joseph Priestley. But again, that's taken out of context. In the same sentence, he called it the most sublime and benevolent system that ever shone on man. So he liked Christ. He liked Jesus. And so did John Adams, and so did George Washington. But the fact of the matter is that the fact that they did revere Christianity says so much more about how much they valued secularism, because they still kept God out of the Constitution.
And that's a really good point, because the secular nature of what government should be is what should be valued. Whether what they believe in their own household, in their own lives, that's fine. And that's, I feel like, we're not necessarily trying to get in the way of people's deeply held beliefs, but it's when those come into the public sphere where it is impacting things like health and education and stuff. So think of it like if you had a Muslim president, which is absolutely possible. Article 3 of the Constitution says it can happen. I don't know if the electorate would, but that's besides the point. If you did, that wouldn't automatically make America a Muslim country. So this just helps people to realize that it doesn't matter the religious views of the people in charge. There's nothing about the nature of the state over which they preside. It's a complete fallacy, but I understand why people make it. And I suppose it doesn't help that you have God everywhere in your sort of traditions and culture, but it's just one of those things. It's odd because England, lamentably, is a Christian country. We don't have a codified constitution. It's a bit complicated. There are only 3 countries in the world that don't.
and we're one of them. So our constitution is made up of conventions, and really it's difficult to sort of formulate. But because of that, we can safely say that England is a Christian country, and yet our people are more secular, and our government is more secular than yours. And this is weird, because I think that even in a Christian country, I would like to see the amount of secularism that we have. Right, this is fine. So it's not just a case that England is excessively secular compared to America. No, England is where it should be. It's America is excessively religious to where it should be. Even as a secular state, it's too. Even as a religious state, it's too religious. And so, as a secular state, something needs to change.
Well, I mean,
again, one of the reasons we have this is because people are afraid to call themselves atheists.
Well, like we're not a Christian nation, but we have, Ken Ham's Ark in the middle of the country. So we're not in the best place right now in terms of intellectualism, secularism, and the things that could and should move a country forward. So there is a lot of work to do, isn't there?
Things can change relatively quickly. People often get very pessimistic about these things. Yes, it's a shame to see, but we can change things relatively quickly as long as we're willing to speak up. But I understand why people don't want to, because again, it's a bit of a kind of vicious circle, in the sense that in order for more people to speak up, we need to create an environment in which they can. But in order to create an environment in which they can, people need to speak up, which is why we need people who are willing to do it regardless of the sort of feedback they're going to get. I get a lot of hate mail, as I'm sure you do too. Thick skin helps, right? You can get by. And so I think you sort of need to call on everybody who is willing to do it. One day I'd like to say we can call on everybody to sort of stand up for what they believe in or don't believe in. But for now, I completely sympathise with people not wanting to raise their voices. But that's one of the reasons that I decided to.
And even then, you can come across just as a dick unintentionally, because whenever you say something like, there's no such thing as when you die, that's it, you're taking away something that's happy and something that brings this person pleasure, and you're not offering anything else in return for them to then replace that happy place that they had in their life. So if we can just figure out a way to take away the idea of heaven and God and seeing grandma and grandpa, and then all the other people who are in heaven, which that has to be a lot of people, and my social anxiety is already going off for that. But if we take away all that and just replace it with like kittens, I think we would move a lot further, a lot quicker.
Look, to the point that you said about having to sort of let people down. Okay. No, not the kittens, but having to let people down.
Oh, damn it.
I'm reminded of something Sam Harris said once, which was, he sort of delivered it like comedy, but the essence of the point is still there, which is, he said, imagine you had a friend who one day came to you absolutely elated at the fact that he'd realized last night in a dream that he was going to marry Angelina Jolie. It was going to happen, and he was just over the moon about it, and it brought him purpose and meaning, and he wanted to get out of bed every day because he knew that one of these days he's going to meet Angelina Jolie. Now, you have two choices. You can either say, listen, okay, yeah, that's great, cool. You keep that up, and you quit your job so you can move to America. You change your career path, and you just abandon your friends and family to go and chase after Angelina Jolie. Or you can say, look, sorry, but you're wrong, and here's why. Now, obviously, they may be a bit depressed, and they may go back to not getting out of bed, but eventually it's going to be much better in the long run, because you're saving them a lot of harm when it comes to sort of family relations and education and workplace and their politics. It's all going to be affected by it. So it's best to just sort of nip it in the bud. And yeah, it's not going to be comfortable for the first few days, weeks, months even, but trust me, it's worth it. I can tell you from experience, I'm in a much better place now. Thanks to having over 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, that does help. But also because I have rid myself of the shackles that I wasn't even aware existed. It's like if you carry a backpack heavy enough for long enough. I've been on a few hikes in my time, and after long enough, you sort of forget that you're wearing it. It just feels normal. But at the end of that hike, you take off that backpack and you feel like you're flying because you didn't realize it was there. And as soon as you take it off, goodness, it's the greatest feeling.
I love that. And I was, the last question I was going to ask you, but I think you just really answered it so well, is like, what would you tell people who were questioning or wondering what life would be like without faith or religion? I think that was a really perfect way to describe it. You're carrying something that you might not even know or feel at a point.
I mean, well, I would say that, and I'd also say that, look, I warn you, it's not going to be the easiest thing to do. There are going to be times where you're going to sort of regret your decision. It may have social implications. If that is the case, I'm not necessarily saying that you should just drop religion and you'll be happy instantly. Do what works for you. If you are in a completely religious community with religious family members, place to come out as an atheist. Or perhaps you're not an atheist, you're just questioning things, but be gradual. Whereas if you're in a situation where you're the only religious person you know, then you may be able to just instantly change your mind and people will accept you. So it depends on the situation. But if you are in a position to change your mind, to look at varying evidence, and to come out and say what you actually believe, there's so many benefits in doing it that you probably won't recognize until you've tried it. You don't have to tell everyone at once. Just tell a close friend, tell your closest family, see what happens. And the majority of times, if you get it right and if you know that it's going to be a safe environment for you to do so, you'll be surprised. It's like you see those videos of people coming out as gay online and they tell their parents and their parents just go, oh, whatever.
Cool.
Yeah, okay.
Obviously, that's not always the case. And when that happens, you've got to recognize that, firstly, a lot of people already know when that kind of thing's going to happen. But secondly, if that does happen, there's such a vivid, enthusiastic community of people online and in real life who will offer you support.
Yeah.
But like I say, it's not for everybody. But if you are in a position to do it, then do it. Let it be known.
And I think even moving beyond that, I at least this is how I feel, and I don't want to, of course, put work on other people that don't want extra work. But I feel like I owe it to those who can't come out like that, because it was never hard for me to come out and say that. I told my mom I didn't believe in any God when I was, I think, 13, and she cried. But outside of that, nothing changed. And so I'm extremely privileged in many capacities like that. But I feel like I owe it to people who can't come out and talk like that. Or when I talk about Islam on the page, I always get at least a dozen ex-Muslims or atheist Muslims, or however they choose to identify, that are in, and it tells you, lives in Pakistan, lives in Saudi Arabia, lives in, other Muslim majority country where they're going to be persecuted or even worse for coming out as being atheist. So I feel if you have the ability to, like you're saying, you need to, if not for yourself, just to get it out there and more normalized, but for these other people who don't have that opportunity, who aren't able to do that, who aren't able to express themselves, or people who are even on the fence that are, they're not sure, they don't want to take a public position about it, or they don't want to talk about it openly like that, that may push them over the edge to say, well, no, I'm more confident in this now and comfortable in sharing what I think and what I believe is the truth.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think, gosh, you're so brave and so noble for doing this kind of thing. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just in a good position. I lucked out. I have an accepting family and friends. And quite frankly, if they weren't accepting, then I'd probably just move out. But that's besides the point. I'm in a good position. Yeah. Because I can. And yes, it's annoying to think that if my career goal is achieved and I end up doing this for a career, then I may end up having to hire armed security. It is unnerving that I know that my inbox is going to sometimes be subjected to insults and death threats. It's not a nice thought, but because I'm in a position where I can talk about this stuff, and because I'm in a position where I don't actually particularly care about what people say online, and I'm in a position where if I'm not offending people, I think I'm doing something wrong. Like you say, I feel I sort of owe a duty. You could almost call it divine inspiration or something.
Yeah, something like that. Undivine inspiration. Well,
something
thank you so much for talking to us today. Like this has been wonderful.
Oh, not at all.
Where if people want to read, see, watch, listen more of you, where can they go to do that?
Go to, if you type in Cosmic Skeptic on YouTube, I have a website, cosmicskeptic.com. It's skeptic with a K. I often say Cosmic Skeptic with a K, but then I worry that people are going to think that the K goes at the beginning. No. In fact, I've got it. I have it written here on my makeshift 10,000 subscriber plaque.
I love that.
Anywhere. Yeah. Well, now it's I haven't been sent my silver one from YouTube yet, so I sort of modified it until it comes.
I love it. Yeah.
An extra 0, but any day now. But yes, cosmicskeptic.com, Twitter, Facebook, all the usual stuff. It's all there. So if anybody would like to hear any of my opinions and whatnot, then you're more than welcome.
And we got links in the description of the video on YouTube and Facebook, and we'll put those in the show notes when the actual episode itself comes out. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us today.
Thank you.
That's all. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So